Good. All right. I think we're taping. Um, so this is kind of a little slideshow here. I'm going to go over talking about chapters 15 and 16. It is part of your winter break assignment. I didn't want to leave you completely astray. So, you'll watch this maybe once we get back to school. Some of you will check it out on Moodle beforehand. But what I kind of want to do is kind of go through a few places I popped up here. Nothing much. I think the first thing we need to talk about when we talk about the chapter 15, the world in 1450, is we have to understand the Mongols and what they have done. And not to beat a dead horse, but the Mongols have reinvigorated trade around this entire part of the world we will likely just call Eurasia. From linking China to Eastern Europe, they have allowed the concept of the Silk Road to come back. Now, besides economic things, the Mongols also did help create states. They helped develop the Muscovites here, the Russians. They helped weaken the caliphates, thus create a new Islamic era. They helped create the Yuan here, which will lead directly to the Ming. So the Mongols are nation builders, religious toleration, but also, of course, economic connections. The book then, of course, talks about, but we have to remember the downside of the Mongols. And that is, and we could do a pen color here, that is this, the bubonic plague. I think this is just a wonderful example of how what the Mongols brought to the table was so wonderful and so great. But with greatness comes the negative consequences of interaction. And we'll see the same things going over here when we see what the smallpox does to this entire part of the Americas. So as great it is that Americas are going to be westernized, we could also say it was great that the Mongols helped reinvigorate trade, but let's see if I could write this in pen, 1/3 of Europe is going to perish in the bubonic plague. So, yay Mongols, boo Mongols. Let's get out of this. Come back to it. All right. Now, let's move over here to Middle East in flux. What did I mean the Middle East in flux? Well, this is by the way the fourth time I've recorded this, so I'm going to try and pare back some of the things I've said. First, the Mongols did conquer the Abbasid, the great power here in Baghdad. This will thus weaken the last great caliphate, thus weakening the centralization of Islam. Thus, I would say, since the fall of the Abbasid, Islam is powerful, Islam is strong, but it's not a centralized caliphate the way it had ever been. Now, years later, the Byzantine up here, here's Constantinople. The Byzantine are going to fall. Now they fall to the Ottoman Turks. Now the Ottoman Turks want to be the new caliphate, want to be the new stronghold. They even start, knocking on the door of Southeast Europe right here. And that's a whole new set of baggage right now in world history. But I'm going to say that they would never tend to what the Abbasid were. So the Middle East is kind of in a flux. Remember, Constantinople here was the hub. We use that term over and over. Religious hub, economic hub, political hub, since the fall of Rome. I would also say now that the Abbasids are fallen and the Byzantine had fallen, their fall was very, God, how do I say this? Was gentle. The world handled it. Like when Rome fell, the world, Western Europe, didn't handle it so well. Thus, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. But the Byzantine and the Abbasid decline and fall was almost absorbed by other economic and political things that were already going on. I think that this shows something strong about the world as a global network, able to hand the fall of grand civilizations. Next, the Ming. We're going to talk more about Jungho, maybe watch some video on him. Basically, he was a Muslim eunuch who will take fleets out, travel along India, even along this part of Africa. This shows the Ming's desire to spread their name. I don't want to say they weren't conquerors, they were not conquistadors, they were not looking for colonies. The Ming, if anything, were trying to say, like a billboard, we are here, we are a strong state, we are the Middle Kingdom, watch out. Remember, they've had a history of being a tribute state with Japan, Korea, and of course, Vietnam. Um, and I think the reason why I use the private power is the Ming saw that in their expansion, at least their, spreading out and letting everybody know their power and prestige, they saw the downside of it. And that this part of the world, look at my circle, this part of the world could come and mess up the Middle Kingdom. It's almost like Zheng went out, saw nothing there, so came home. And now I will say that wasn't necessarily Zheng Ho. It was the Ming's leadership. They also were spending lots of money on it, and we're having to raise taxes, and we're going into debt. So it made a lot of sense to end the expansion and bring everybody come back home. Um, so the Mongols did all this. Middle East is in flux. Ming are private power, and finally, with all of this going on in Eurasia and on this side of the world, Western Europe is given permission to wake up. Now they wake up with the benefits that the Mongols brought. The Ming brought, and also the Mongols brought the compass. So we see that Western Europe is going to be awake, but because of the benefits of what the Mongols and the Tang and the Song, and of course the economic and the scientific and political beliefs of the Middle East have brought them. Now they wake up in three ways that I've summarized here: thought, culture, and exploration. We will study exploration in chapter 16. We'll study thought and culture in 16, 17 as we look at the Renaissance and, of course, eventually the Reformation. Um, okay, let's review for a second. Let's see if we can answer this question. The medieval state, which originated in the classical era and whose fall in 1453 marked the end of the post-classical era, was the Byzantine, the Song, the Abbasid, and the Kievan Rus. Ding, 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 ding. The answer is the Byzantine. Next review. The Voyages of Jungho expanded the official maritime activity for the purpose of searching for converts to Buddhism, enhancing Chinese prestige, conquering new territories, establishing a sea route to Europe. Answer: enhancing Chinese prestige. Final review. Some world historians have argued that the growth in European influence in the period 1450 to 1750 was due in large part to non-European inventions, the history of which of the following technological developments best supports this contention. Silkweave. It's the compass, okay, which I just quickly mentioned. Okay, now we're on to chapter 16. I have some notes in front of me, so if you hear me pause, it's probably because I'm trying to make sure I'm addressing. So we are on chapter 16, the world economy. Stearns makes mention of this little intro bit about how when the Spanish conquistadors went and found silver, it somehow created increased taxations in China. And I thought it was pretty interesting. And it really talks about globalization, but, 1,000 years ago almost. So the conquistadors go, and in Northwest South America, they find a plethora of silver. They bring it back. Some of that silver is used and spent inside Western Europe, but a lot of that silver heads directly to Asia to buy the commodities that cannot be found, such as silk and porcelain. Can't find the commodities that cannot be found. That means there's a huge influx of gold and specifically silver here. This is going to be an unfavorable balance of trade because what goes out here is worth more than what comes back to Western Europe. Now, what comes back to Western Europe, besides the ideas and the science and the new ideas, those little commodities, that is an unfavorable balance of trade of what is going out. With this new influx of silver, the Chinese can totally demand taxation at a different rate, at a different way, thus changing the taxations of China. So that's kind of what Stearns was saying. Thought it was cute. Okay, Stearns eventually gets to this concept of coronations, but I'm doing the opposite. I'm talking about coronations at the beginning of chapter 16 slideshow here. The coronations that I think that he mentions and I think of when I think of trade, when I think of politics, when I think of globalization are up here. We got Italy. Now, Italy is not an exploration nation, but it's always going to be that hub, obviously, with Venice and such. We have the Portuguese and the Spanish working here in southern Europe to be the leaders of early expansion. The English and the French, I mean, English and the Dutch, Holland, or the future Netherlands, they are a whole new step above France when it comes to having their businesses head out for the benefit of both businesses and for the country, thus mercantilism. We all know that eventually I'll get to the fact that the English and the French are going to compete specifically in the New World in North America. But we can't negate the role that Holland played both in the New World but also in Indonesia, Malaysia, and East Asia. All right. Now, these coronations kind of make up the core part of the world that will go around and, as I think the book talks about, looks for dependents, looks for people that they are going to subjugate, that they are going to take the bullion from, that they're going to have they're going to have an extremely favorable balance of trade. And I would say that this mercantile behavior helps these nations thrive to such a degree that they're allowed to have the Industrial Revolution and the benefits of manufactured goods. So I'm going to say that mercantilism set a stage for that Industrial Revolution that will really push China and its successes in the 13, 14, 15, 1600s off to the side. Now, part of the benefits that Western Europe got was from, of course, the Columbian Exchange. The cash crops of the New World coming here to be sold. Potatoes in Ireland and a whole new staple crop, a cheap crop for people to eat. Thus, you're going to have a population explosion in Europe. You're going to have quinine. The quinine plant is going to allow Europeans to travel deeper into Africa to fight malaria. So yay, good for that. So we have tobacco, quinine, and potato. They're your three ones going from the New World to the Old World. Now coming from the Old World to the New World, ironically coffee, when we think of Latin America, it's not what we think. The horse, and of course, disease. Smallpox, probably reigning number one because of how fast it decimated some cultures, up to 50% decimation rate in the American Indians. Now, this helps strengthen Europe and it helps weaken the New World. I mean, just having coffee and tobacco now going to be in the New World makes there a more important commodity for the Europeans to beat down. I mean, sugarcane coming from the New World, I mean, to the New World here. I mean, this is what the Caribbeans are going to use, the Caribbeans are going to use for the slave reasons. Boy, I'm not making much sense. It's 12:15 at night. So now we see the rise of mercantilism. We have what people want, and now we're going to have states taking the lead. In my opinion, mercantilism is when the nation helps lead the economy not in a socialist way by granting permissions for different companies, helping create monopolies for different companies. Now, some of the companies that these mercantile powers create act as de facto governments of themselves. But at the end of the day, it was for the glory of the state. Mercantilism very strong specifically in, for example, Great Britain. Quick review. Which of the following statements most accurately describes the impact of development of core dependent economic zones on state formation? Forced labor and European influence tended to generate weak governments in dependent nations, while increased trade revenues tended to generate increasing government strength in core states. While the profits of global trade tended to strengthen governments in core regions, the creation of colonies extended powerful governments to dependent zones as well. Though B can be discussed, especially in the 13 colonies, the best answer is A. So here we go. We got the Portuguese. I have question marks here because I find it ironic. We don't usually talk about the Portuguese as a political or economic power. The Portuguese helped lead with Prince Henry the Navigator. Prince Henry the Navigator, famous for his adventures going around the Cape. He also set up schools in Portugal to help train and promote this mercantile behavior. The Portuguese are going to go around the world and set up, some religious affiliations with East Asia, but also some colonies with Brazil. So the Portuguese were fast at this. Now, unfortunately for the Portuguese, they were so early in it, they set the tone, but then others were able to step above it and take their explorations and say, okay, it's already been explored, now we're going to make more money off of it. They were already more stable core nations. Review. Best answer is A. Spain. I don't really want to talk too much about Spain, but we have Columbus, we have Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama is famous for going to India. We have Columbus, obviously, coming to the New World. Now, we do know that the conquistadors are going to take out the Incas. We know the conquistadors are going to take out the Aztecs. But what I want to make mention that the book makes mention of is that the Aztecs and the Incas were already very fragile before any conquistador came. Because of the centralized socialist system of the Incas, they were actually kind of breaking down. Their own family was breaking down the territory. And the Aztecs, well, we understand that the tribute system, where you ask a bunch of men to go ahead and get sliced up, that did not push people towards the government. It pushed people only further away. Magellan will take the Philippines. The Philippines will be Spanish until the Spanish-American War of 1898. The Spanish are going to fight successfully the Ottomans, and where the Ottomans had hoped to create a more powerful navy, thus control the Mediterranean and see where else the Islamic power can go, the Spanish were able to win. And with that, kind of kick back the impact of Islam. Review. You might want to hit pause now. Hopefully you can figure this one out on your own. Now, Northern Europe eventually gets into the global economy. I kind of summarize Northern Europe as Holland, as England, as in France, and we understand that these three powers, they're going to compete for different parts of the globe, with the French and the British fighting out the 7 Years' War around the world, but largely the French and Indian War. What was that? 1756 to 1763. And of course, the end of the French and Indian War, or 7 Years' War, will see the end of the French colonial system here in North America, thus being driven out, thus, except for my Quebec people, and creating a British colonial powerhouse that is going to thrive for another, you know, 15 years until there's a little independence thingy going on. Review? Answer: Treaty of Paris. And this is where we're going to pick up when I see you next. I hope I hit a lot of the things that I wanted, my talking points, but everything I brought up today was definitely in your book, and it is now 12:20, and I'm tired. Take care, all.